Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today for our panel, Earth Day Champions, Environmental Prosperity, Prosperity and Environmental Quality Go Hand in Hand. My name is Katie Tahuahua. I am the Communications Manager for Life Powered, which is a national energy policy initiative of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And our mission, in short, is to raise America's energy IQ. I was joking with my team that we should rebrand Life Powered to Girl Powered today because we have an awesome panel of women today to celebrate Earth Day. And I use the word celebrate intentionally because it's been a heavy year or year and a half for a lot of people. We've had COVID, we've had some really divisive politics going on. We have this media culture that seems to be obsessed with giving us the worst possible news at all times. But on Earth Day, we have some really good news to celebrate. There's a narrative out there that our environment is getting worse and that humans are to blame. But when you look at the facts, that's actually not the case. So real briefly, I'm going to introduce our panel of experts who are going to share this good news. And then we'll jump right into the meat of the panel. Joining us today, we have Mandy Gunasekara, who is a former Chief of Staff of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. She's a veteran climate and energy strategist, communicator, and environmental attorney with experience on Capitol Hill and a nonprofit she started called Energy 45. We also have Audrey Barrios, who's the manager of external affairs for Liberty Oilfield Services. And Liberty is really leading the industry in reframing the way that we have these public policy conversations about energy and the environment. So I'm super excited about what she has to share from that perspective. We also have Vanessa Mendoza, who is CEO and co-founder of Kite and Key Media, a brand new digital media company who produces research and evidence-driven video content about some of the most complicated public policy issues that are going on today. She also has 15 years of leadership experience in public policy, including working at the Manhattan Institute. So I'm super excited to dive into this today. As we're going, y'all, if you come up with any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments in Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching, and we will get to those at the end of the program. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mandy. Mandy, can you start us off by just setting the stage? As I mentioned, there's this idea out there that the environment is awful. People and fossil fuels and everything we do are making it worse, but that's really actually not the case. Can you just share some of this good news about America's environmental achievements and why the future is really looking bright moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Katie. It's really great to be here with you and the rest of the panelists today. So we have such a good news story and a lot to be proud about when it comes to our environmental record here in this country. First and foremost, let's talk about clean air. This is something I worked very extensively on when I was in the Trump administration, working in the Office of Air and Radiation. And today we have the cleanest ever air on record. And we at EPA started measuring that in the 1970s. And since then, we've had a significant reduction in what we call the criteria pollutants. So things like particulate matter, nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, lead, ozone, things that you don't want in the air and you don't want people breathing. Well, since 1970, we've reduced this significantly to where today we are breathing the cleanest air ever on record. In water, we have the very good clean drinking water systems. Globally, we are #1 in terms of access to clean drinking water. And just to set a metric, so again, a lot of the standards at EPA, they started measuring them significantly in 1970. So in 1970, only about 40% of our nation's water systems met basic clean drinking water standards some of the time. Sorry, I had a brief interruption. And today, 90% of the nation's clean drinking water systems meet all health-based standards all of the time. So you can see we've made significant progress. Now, that's not to say there isn't work to be done. I believe everyone or a lot of people may recall the lead crisis in Flint, Michigan. This happened in the Obama-Biden administration a couple years ago. And when we came in the Trump administration, we wanted to figure out an effective way to ensure, one, lead doesn't get in drinking water systems. And then two, if it does, that the agency and working with state partners were well positioned to respond quickly to reduce lead from being in the drinking water of exposed populations and helping them get the resources they need to solve this problem. And so we updated something called the lead and copper rule. It was extensive effort that we finalized towards the end of the administration, but it's really propped up the ability for states, local water municipalities, and the populations that rely on them for access to safe drinking water to ensure that there is no lead drinking water crisis, as the likes of which we saw in Flint, Michigan, that ever happens again. Also, when we're talking about water, something that folks may hear a lot about is plastic in the oceans, or marine litter, marine debris are a couple different terms that people use to talk about them. We in this country are a leader in terms of getting trash out of water systems. And what you need to understand when you're talking about plastic in the oceans, 80% of it is the result of bad waste management processes or lack of relative infrastructure. So we've done a good job in this country in setting up effective waste management systems. And one of the things we've done and focused a lot under the Trump administration was sharing that expertise with global partners abroad. There's a program called the Trash Free Waters Program that's run by US EPA, and we reached up to 50 global partners to help instill better waste management practices to ensure that plastic never gets into the rivers and never gets into the oceans. And so you don't have to worry about things like we all saw the sea turtles with plastic straws in their nose. We don't have to worry about that being a problem going forward, so long as the partnerships that we've set up continue to expand and build off of the expertise that we have shared. One of the last things I want to talk about that there's just such a great news story to talk about is addressing legacy pollution. Now, the environmental standards we are all accustomed to and expect today that didn't always exist in our history. And as the Industrial Revolution took off, our understanding of how that can impact the surrounding environment and the people who live in them, we understood the implications of that and have put in place a series of very successful programs. And one of them is called the Superfund program. So this represents some of the most toxic land sites in the entire country. And in the 4 years of the Trump administration, we focused on going in the most complex polluted lands and getting the pollution out and setting those communities up for success. Overall, we got 82 sites deleted from the Superfund list, which means we not only cleaned them up, but we started investing money through other grants that allowed them to be open for business, which really helps elevate the prosperity of the people who had been living in the communities that had been left behind for many administrations and for a very long time. So we have a lot to celebrate: clean air, clean water, cleaned up lands, being honest about our environmental state. There is work to be done, but we really focused on addressing tangible issues with practical solutions. And what that comes down to is you can cut regulations. In the Trump administration, we cut about 78 regulations, saving about $99 billion that got to stay into the economy, where companies could invest in new workers, better infrastructure, and integrating the latest and greatest technology into their relative systems. So we have a good news story. I'm happy to have been a part of it for a little bit along the way. And Katie, with that, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. It's awesome to hear that all this progress has been made in Republican and Democrat administrations. It's not a partisan issue. You know, everyone wants to protect our environment. But the other thing that's really interesting is that all of this environmental progress in clean air and clean water and everything you mentioned happened while our population, economy, and energy production and consumption increased significantly. Most people probably assume that, you know, human activity is worse for the planet. So as our population grows, as our economy grows, things are going to get worse. But that's not proven to be the case. Audrey, can you explain a little bit about the role of energy and the energy industry in fueling that environmental progress? Why is it that we're seeing these dramatic improvements, you know, quote unquote, despite using so many fossil fuels? Oh, Audrey, you're muted. Man, a year into this pandemic, Zoom is still causing us problems.
Still,
There we go.
Are you good? Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. It wouldn't be a virtual panel without a little bit of unmute problems. I'm so happy to be here and be here with a phenomenal group of ladies on this panel. And I think, Katie, you mentioned that it's not energy is not a partisan issue. And wanting a cleaner, better environment shouldn't be a partisan issue. We all want that. It's also not an industry-specific issue. I think from my particular industry, we always get thought of as the bad guys. And we are trying to change that narrative. And we also care about the environment and making things cleaner and better for all of our citizens here in the United States and on the global scale. And as countries become wealthier, they have the option to clean up their own environment. And fossil fuels are a big part of that decision. For example, if someone is living in extreme poverty, so that's classified by living on less than $2 a day, they're not going to have the options to maybe bring an LPG stove into their household. That will better their personal indoor air quality, but it will also better the environment. They might be still having to depend on deforestation and using biofuels and like dung, agricultural waste, sticks to make food, heat their homes, etc. So as countries get wealthier and as individuals get wealthier, they're able to make those decisions and change their use of energy. And our industry plays a big part of that change. There's a couple of great case studies out there. Mandy had mentioned the EPA study on looking at what the US has done. And just to add on top of that, so from 1970 to 2017, the US GDP has grown 128%. So we've all become richer. This is a per capita basis. Miles driven, so we're traveling more, is up 82% in that time frame. And with that wealth and increased technology, we've become more efficient with our use of energy. So people are not using less energy, yet energy consumption is down an aggregate of 9% in that time frame. CO2 emissions down 22% in that aggregate emissions, which Mandy mentioned as the top 6 criteria pollutants outlined from the Clean Air Act, is down 83%. So those are numbers that we can really celebrate. Another really great example from more of a global scale on how access to wealth increases environment is the island of Hispaniola. So if you look at the island of Hispaniola from a bird's eye view, the aerial shot of the island, you don't need like a clear line to look at where Dominican Republic is and where Haiti is. That line is visible by just looking at the trees on one side. That's Dominican Republic, has vast resources, access to fossil fuels, and their citizens are more wealthy. And then the other side, Haiti doesn't have that opportunity. So therefore, the side of Haiti on Hispaniola is deforest. They're using their forest in order to keep food on their tables. So as we increase the use of LPG stoves and such, then those individuals are able to make those decisions, increasing the health of them, as well as looking at different environmental impacts. And here in the US, another great story is the largest driver of decreasing greenhouse gas emissions is displacing coal. So natural gas is a big story on that. And we've decreased our coal usage by over 40%, which has impacted our greenhouse gas emissions. But really, you can't discuss any environmental impacts without actually considering not only environmental impacts, but the human impacts that are tied to that. And looking at the absence of our industry and how that would affect the humans is a really important thing to do, looking at different options going forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Audrey. Vanessa, I'm going to turn it over to you real quick. So you have just launched Kite and Key Media, this brand new organization, and your first video was about the mining and environmental impacts specifically associated with renewable energy. That's not an easy topic to start with. It's pretty complicated, and it's not easy to challenge this entrenched narrative that we have to go 100% renewable for the planet's sake. And your video shares why some of that assumption is not correct. Can you just share with everyone watching why you chose to make that specific video, what the responses to it have been like, and just the challenges of communicating on these really complex issues?
Yes, well, thanks so much for having me. I'm so pleased to be here. And I'm so pleased to have heard all of this good news. Some of it I knew and some of it was news to me. And I'm sure many of you at home are thinking, why didn't I know? Like, why are people celebrating this right now? And a big reason why we made the minerals video, and in fact, a big reason why Kite and Key Media exists, we're on day 47 of our existence, is because we think particularly on environmental issues. Kite and Key Media covers lots of different issues other than environmental. But on environmental issues, we hear things only basically in two ways, right? You care about the environment, and therefore you want more renewables, and anything short of that means you don't care about the environment. So celebrating it sometimes, celebrating the successes sometimes are read as being cavalier about the needs of the environment. And so one of the things we wanted to do with our minerals video is explain how complex the public policy issues are around environmental questions. And so we created this video, it's 6 minutes long, and we did what we do best at Kite and Key, which is that we did the deep research. My partner, Troy Senek, and I come from the think tank world. We love research, but we understand that taking, for example, in the minerals video, 12 white papers and hundreds of pages of information is going to be too time consuming for most people in their everyday lives. So we take out just what you need to know from those research papers, and we condense it down into a 6-minute video that we hope is informative and funny and smart so that you get exactly what you need to know about the issue. Now, the minerals issue is really, really interesting because it shows you how complex these questions are and how much work we need to do on the communications front around questions related to the environment. So the long story short, you can watch the video yourself on the Kite and Key website, on any social media channel, and I think that they'll be sharing the link with you in the email that will come to you after this event. But the story essentially is that we are pushing for all these renewable energies, and one of the most important things we need to know is that for those renewable energy sources, we need rare earth minerals to make them run. Rare earth minerals come out of the ground. The same lobby that's pushing for these green energy sources are also pushing against and putting many regulations into place that make mining almost impossible in the United States. This is a huge problem because we don't want to give up the energy sources, but we also want to give up mining, and those two things don't go together. So the result is that we end up getting so many parts and so many pieces of our rare earth minerals from outside of the country, from many other countries outside of the United States. Some of those countries include China and Russia. And the reason, by the way, that we do this, the reason why so much of the lobby doesn't want the mining here in the United States is because of, on one hand, there are environmental concerns related to mining, and the other, human rights concerns. The problem is when we push it outside of the United States, we actually don't have any control over those things. So the well-intended idea of making sure that the mining industry was running the way that they wanted to in the United States ended up having child labor in Africa, national security questions in terms of which countries were receiving the rare earth minerals from. There's so many unintended consequences related to the fact that we're pushing the green energy sources so hard that too many people haven't taken into consideration. So we put the video out so that we would explain it so that people, when they make up their mind, wherever they go, at least they have the basic information they need to have to make a good choice about these issues. We put it out into the world. This is day 47 now, and I think we're just on the cusp of 250,000 views of the video. We're so pleased with the reception that we have received. One of the greatest compliments we got was from a researcher in Silicon Valley who said, I've written 2 books and countless articles to try to say what you guys have been able to say in a 6-minute video. So we're really proud to have participated in giving people a little bit of a better education around these questions. And if all we do is succeed in letting people understand that we have to have a much deeper, more comprehensive understanding of these questions before we come to a solid and super strong opinion on them, then we think that we've done something really good for the country.
Awesome. Thank you, Vanessa. And I definitely encourage everyone watching this to watch this Kite and Key mining video after the fact. We'll drop a link to it in the comments. And as she mentioned, it'll also be in the follow-up email for those of y'all who RSVP to join us ahead of time. Since you mentioned child labor, that reminds me, Audrey, that you and I share a passion for an issue that a lot of people don't know about. This panel is talking about environmental quality and prosperity. And can you talk about energy poverty and why this problem is so serious, and what we can do to help end energy poverty, and the role specifically of fossil fuels in ending that poverty around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. Another, like, it's a huge passion of mine, and shares a lot of people at Liberty share the same passion. And like what Vanessa said, unintended consequences are real, and we need to look at the full picture when making some decisions that impact others. So I think it's first to step back to look at what we believe the two global energy challenges today. So one is energy poverty, and one is climate change. And in rich countries like the US, climate change dominates the narrative. That's all we hear. And until Vanessa comes around and lets everyone know about some other things going on, that's what is going to dominate the industry or the narrative. But I think the most important issue in energy is talking about energy poverty. And energy poverty is not something that just happens in a different country. It happens here in the United States, but it just happens to take a backseat to climate change. And some of the pushes towards climate change, the aggressive movement to climate change, causes the problem to be worse. So we look at California as a perfect example. They have traditionally been a huge aggressive mover in responding to climate change. And since that, electricity prices in California are now 50% higher than the national average. And this disproportionately affects low-income individuals. And because of these great increases of electricity in California, now California has become, they have the highest adjusted poverty rate in the whole entire nation. From a global perspective, Germany also gives us some really great insight of what this big push to focus on climate change does with the unintended consequences. So Germany has made this huge push away from fossil fuels, and in doing so, their aggressive decarbonization efforts have doubled energy prices in Germany. And their energy prices now in Germany are almost three times the average price that we pay here in the US. And the biggest factor in that's the biggest wow factor, is Germany in this time has reduced their greenhouse gases less than the US. So how is that possible? The US continues to decrease greenhouse gases by producing oil and gas here in our country. We do it better, we do it safer, we do it more efficiently. And the Shale Revolution has been driving energy poverty out on a global basis that's happening here in the US. The US is now they're the biggest producer of oil in the world, and we're the top 5 producers of natural gas in the world. We've completely broken up the OPEC domination on the global oil and gas market. And in doing so, we are able to provide a lower cost of energy, not just to individuals here in the US, but on a global market as well. So this is something to really, really celebrate in the US. And we've accomplished so much in a really short amount of time through this push on the Shale Revolution and technologies such as horizontal drilling, which decreases the surface area that's disturbed, another environmental win, and also hydraulic fracturing that has been on the scene since 1949, which a lot of people don't know. Yet that's the first commercial use of hydraulic fracturing, but has really taken off and changed the landscape since around 2010.
Awesome. And since this is our girl-powered panel, I'd be remiss if I didn't just mention that the potential of ending energy poverty for women and girls specifically is so huge. There was a study done, I believe, by UNICEF recently that women and girls in developing countries spend 200 million hours a day collectively walking to get water. That's just walking to get water. That doesn't include the additional time they spend walking to get wood or animal dung or whatever it is that they're burning for fuel in their house. And if you imagine how richly they could use that time on things like getting an education, starting a business, becoming civic leaders, and providing for their family, instead of having to spend all that time walking to get water, if they had access to the same affordable, reliable energy that we have to get clean water pumped to their house when they need it, to have electricity, to be able to do homework at night, things like that, it just has amazing potential for women around the world. It's something I'm very passionate about, but we only have limited time, so I'll get off my soapbox and get back to our panel. Mandy, it is Earth Day, and every holiday like this is political, and President Biden has come out with a new announcement today. Can you just tell us a little bit about what's going on in DC that we should be paying attention to, what it holds for the future of environmental policy? Just what should we have our eyes on moving forward from today?
Yeah, certainly. So what we're seeing in DC is unfortunately the progression of a very anti-American energy policy approach. The Democrats and the Biden administration have really taken this stance that's more prohibitive versus the stance that I believe Republicans and TPPF and a lot of others support, which is more conservation. Let's do more with less. Let's just not ban the use of everything. What you've seen with the Green New Deal, the Biden administration's climate plan, and some of the things that he said today in the context of their commitments under the Paris Climate Accord is that they want to attack and limit the use and expansion of the very technologies that Audrey and Vanessa both were talking about have gotten us to this point of significant environmental progress. What some of the things to pay attention to is one, the Paris Climate Accord. So the Biden administration got us back in. It's a really bad deal. It's a bad deal for the United States because it puts a lot of economic pressure on us that's ultimately going to ship jobs and economic productivity overseas. And China, they don't have to do anything under the auspices of the Paris Climate Accord until 2030, and then they can think about reducing their emissions. Meanwhile, we're going to be putting in place really strict regulations that curb the ability of the fossil fuel industry to expand and grow, continue to build out a clean, healthy, modern society here in the United States, and we're going to just tamp that down and ship it overseas. So it's no wonder that China is out there touting the Paris Climate Accord as a great deal for them because they have a lot to benefit. And it's a problem when our administration is signing American workers up for those sorts of outcomes. The other thing to focus on is the ban on federal lands for oil and gas development. Day one, the Biden administration, they denied the Keystone XL pipeline, which was the immediate loss of about 11,000 jobs. And just to go down a tiny little rabbit hole on that point, it's not just the jobs that are lost that is really unfortunate. Those jobs support families and communities. And so that's a lot of money and investment that is going by the wayside because of a political position on something that we know we need. We need more infrastructure in this country. That's why we're talking about an infrastructure bill. But on day one, because of a political position, the Biden administration shut down a major infrastructure project that was going to be one of the cleanest, most efficient ways to move energy around this country. And a lot of jobs went away with it as well, which is detrimental to the families and the communities that rely on tax investments that have bettered everyone's lives. So the ban, the federal ban for oil and gas development on federal lands, this is hugely impactful for Western states where a lot of their state is federal lands, and it's a major problem. They're going through the analyses right now over at the Department of Interior. So we'll see that if this ban is going to be extended in perpetuity or if it's something that they're going to lift incrementally. But that is something to pay attention to. I imagine Audrey has a lot to say in this context, but it's going to make it really hard for the shining star of our clean energy story here in this country to expand and do what it's done that has gotten us to where we are today. And the last thing to follow too, I already kind of mentioned Keystone XL, but there's a lot of pipelines that the environmentalists and a lot of the NGOs that are pushing these prohibitive-based extreme policies the Biden administration is listening to. So we've got to follow and be on the lookout for other really important energy infrastructure projects that they're going to be going after. And then, you saw the Green New Deal. It's the same thing we saw a year ago that was unleashed. Again, it's not about improving the environment. We know how to improve the environment, and it doesn't require spending $93 trillion or forcing Americans to give up any of the individual freedoms that they now enjoy. The Green New Deal is totally on the opposite side of that, just trying to take a lot of the decisions that we can make as individuals or state experts can make that are closer to the ground, taking that away, putting it in the hands of the federal government. That's just going to lead to all sorts of problems and not a lot of progress in the way that we've enjoyed and experienced over the last few decades.
And with the Green New Deal back and President Biden's announcement today that he is going to be trying somehow to cut US carbon dioxide emissions by 50% by 2030, which is essentially an impossible goal. But even if he was able to do that, would it actually affect climate change?
No, there's been numerous studies. I know the Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute, a lot of different climate scientists that I actually used to work with at the agency and then speak to some of the external groups. They've done these analyses. We could shut down the entire economy. And the net effect 100 years from now is less than 0.1%. It's significantly small in terms of how this could impact the temperature. And on that note too, we already lead the world in reducing greenhouse gases. And it's totally unnecessary to try to limit economic growth that's necessary to sustain this healthy, clean society that we now all enjoy.
Awesome. So we've got time for one more question before we jump to Q&A. So Vanessa, I'm going to kick it back to you. Can you share just some tactical advice for the folks watching this today, given all the gloom and doom going on in the headlines and honestly pretty limited understanding of some of these complex environmental issues? Can you share some advice for the people watching today on how they can spark fruitful conversations about this issue and just improve public discourse? What can we do as regular people?
Well, I think the role of all of us here and everyone watching is incredibly important. We make up the climate of public opinion, and the folks who represent us are responsive to that climate. So we need to all participate in getting better information out into the space. And I have two sort of specific recommendations to you. I mean, the first is make sure you're having those conversations with people who you don't agree with. Make sure that you're having conversations and that you're asking questions in those conversations, because what you'll find very often is that when you ask someone with respect and say, hey, listen, I really want to understand why you believe that. Like, tell me, help me understand, educate me about the facts that have led you to this decision. Oftentimes these days, you're going to find that the person you're talking to realizes in that moment themselves that they have an opinion that's not built on any kind of solid evidence or foundation of fact. And when you do that, you help them to understand that they should sort of loosen their hold on the opinion that they've been putting out into the world. And that in and of itself is an opportunity. When that door is open, you should take the information that you've learned from TPPF or Life Powered or anything that you might get from Kite and Key Media, all these sort of pieces of information that you can push out to your friends and family to help them be better educated on these issues so that they can make better decisions in their own life. All of the three groups I've just mentioned, many other groups are working really hard to give you the kind of information that you can share, right? So this is not just in the conversations you have around the dinner table or the water cooler one day, whenever we're all back in our offices. I'm in my office today, but not just in that space. You can do it in the social media space too. And I know at Kite and Key and at Life Powered, we're working really hard so that you've got the kind of content you can push out into the community so that you can help them learn more about these issues, and we can make progress in better understanding where we are today and where we need to go tomorrow. So I really highly encourage all of you to take the time to look at the resources that are available and have those conversations, because that will help us leapfrog into the future that we all hope that we can have one day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. With that, I think we'll go to Q&A. Let me see what we've got here. Somebody asked, what is the single best thing from a policy perspective we can do for energy and the environment? And what is the best thing we as individuals can do? I'll leave that open to whoever wants to chime in.
I'm happy to touch on the policy. Certainly, look, the best thing the federal government can do is to go about its regulatory rules from a position of balance. We've got resources and expertise at the federal level, but we need to use that to enhance the efforts that are being played out at the state and local level. There's something embedded in every single environmental statute that exists in this country called cooperative federalism, emphasis on the cooperative. And it's really important that the federal government doesn't overstep its role and get in the way of people who are on the ground, whether it's state officials or whether it's the industry that you're working with. It's really important to have an open dialogue with the people who are going to be responsible for taking ideas and well-intentioned goals and actually implementing them in the field in ways that work. So I would just say from a policy perspective, it's all about balance, and it's about respecting, the idea of cooperative federalism where we're working together and one's not intruding on the other.
Katie, can I just say, I'm so, Mandy, it was so great to hear you say the word balance, because I really think that that's the point that we need to make. We've created this scenario where everything about climate and the future is just this binary choice. It's like you care about it or you don't. And what we need to help people understand, and what we could all do, the viewers and all of us here on the panel, is show people the complexity of the choices that we have in front of us. That's really important. It's hard work and it's a lot of information, but it's the reality of the situation. We need to know what we're balancing, and then we need to make good choices where we think about whether it's people in California, whether it's people in Africa, whether it's here in the United States or not. We need to be really thinking about what are the consequences of our choices, and to do that we have to balance the things that are in front of us. So I'd focus in on that balance point, because I think that's something that people can really understand.
Awesome. So what about parents who are worried about what their kids are hearing in school? Do you have any kid-friendly resources to share for students or teachers? I have an answer to this, but I'll see what y'all have to say first.
Well, I can just jump in quick, because I've had this conversation with my 9-year-old many times. So the number one thing I do with him is I tell him it's okay not to have an opinion about something, which it seems to be like an unbelievable thing to tell a kid these days. But if you don't know anything about these issues yourself, like if you can't recite to me some facts, some actual facts or truths that you've learned through your own research or discovery, then it's okay not to actually have an opinion about it. So I tell my son that all the time. There are more and more resources available. This is part of what Kite and Key Media is trying to do. So it's just a matter of seeking them out so that we can make sure that as our kids grow up, they have a more comprehensive understanding about all the parts that come into play when we make energy policy here in the United States.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Katie.
Go ahead, Mandy.
Oh, well, I would just add that, one of the things too that's important is paying attention to what the school is actually presenting. You don't want to go in and like totally disrupt, but, being a part of the PTA meetings and listening to your kids and looking at their homework and assessing the type of information they're getting. Because the truth is there is a lot of misinformation that's being purposefully fed into the education system. And it's just one more thing as parents that we're going to have to be a little bit more involved in and monitor. But Vanessa, I love that statement too. Like you don't have to be an expert on everything, and it's always okay to say, you know what, I don't know, let me do a little bit of research and we can come back to this conversation. But Katie, back to you.
Yeah, I wish more people in politics would do that. Agree to do more research before they state their opinion. As far as tangible resources go for students, I have a couple recommendations. One, obviously, is Kite and Key Media. Their videos are very short, very clear, very digestible, so they would be great for students. Life Powered also has a video series called Energy 101. It's, I believe, 6 very short 1 to 2 minute animated videos just about the basics of how our energy systems work. Those are also great for students. And for those who are watching in Texas, we've actually developed curriculum for a new class that's being taught in Texas public schools called Foundations of Energy. It's an energy-focused career and technical education course with science-based, fact-based, unbiased perspectives on how energy works and the career opportunities that are available. And that's being taught in, I believe, 6 school districts right now, and we're trying to expand it into as many as we can. And we have curriculum available online for that class for free for any teacher or parent who wants it. So you can check that out at lifepowered.org if you're interested. But let me get to another question real quick. You're saying America's air quality is so great. How come the air was cleaner during the COVID shutdowns? Doesn't that prove we have a problem? What do y'all have to say for that?
So I'll go back to the point that this is a balance. So yeah, the air was cleaner, but the economy was totally shut down, and you've got to think about the consequences that's caused, not just from an economic perspective, but the way that has impacted people's feelings and anxieties about the world. There's a lot of health consequences that were a result of the economies being shut down and people staying in their home. It can't be a binary choice between, well, we have industrial activity and dirtier air versus everyone stays at home and doesn't engage in the economy in the ways that we enjoy by using phones and driving places and seeing friends and going to restaurants and engaging the thing that makes life so wonderful and enjoyable and helps us get through it all together. So, there is a balance. And the point there too is we can continue to improve, but it's going to be through continuing to expand the use of the latest and greatest pollution control technologies. I'll go down another little rabbit hole. Something we worked on was permitting reform at the agency. Under the Clean Air Act, there's all manner of requirements. If you are an industrial actor or building something, that you have to go through a process whereby you need to make sure those actions don't undermine maintaining compliance with certain air quality standards. Well, the problem is some of those have become so onerous, or they've had the counter effect of ultimately what you want to do. It is disincentivize people from investing in the latest and greatest technologies because at the end of the day, a $10 million project to upgrade all your pollution control systems, if it triggers certain permitting requirements, it turns into $1 billion to $2 billion endeavor. And that just doesn't work in the context of the larger economy. So we tried to clarify requirements and fix the permitting systems, so invest in better pollution control technologies and continue to improve the air quality in the way that we've seen over the past couple decades.
And Katie, I want to hop in on that too. I totally agree with Mandy on the push on having some sort of balanced dialogue, looking at the true positives and negatives of each situation. So yes, the air was cleaner during COVID. We weren't driving as much. I think that there's going to be some different changes that happen on an individual basis at looking at our personal impacts, which will be beneficial for the environment. But looking again at the negative impacts of that as well. So going back to May in the oil and gas industry, not only did we hit a big punch in the face with demand completely slipping because of COVID, we also had a supply issue. So many of you remember when oil was being traded for a negative dollar amount. So what on a global scale, because of this shale revolution, and the United States has surged production, even in the last 10 years, our production in the US has gone up by over 57% in just 10 years. And what's that done to the global market is it's completely shaken things up. So when OPEC used to rule the roost and they used to be able to dictate what we paid on a global market for energy, for oil and gas, the U.S. has come in and completely shaken that up. So during this downturn where demand took a dip, a huge dip, and at the same time, OPEC nations saw their chance to impact the U.S. production and industry, they turned their spigots on. So as demand's going this way, supply's going this way, and it created just chaos in the industry. But one thing that's really important to remember is that we all share the same environment. So whether we're producing oil and gas here in the United States or whether it's being produced in Russia or Saudi Arabia, we're all sharing the same environment. And it's the same thing with the policies that are pushing more of the industrial decisions over to China that are not as focused on environment. Same thing with the oil and gas industry. Places like Saudi Arabia, Russia don't have the same standards that we have in the US. So in the 10 years that I've worked at Liberty, I've watched our trucks transform from tier 2 diesel engines to now we are pumping tier 4, which is the highest, latest and greatest technology, tier 4 dual fuel engines. So we're able to connect to the natural gas that's being produced right on the site and utilize that. So that's decreasing our emissions from an industry perspective. So yes, there's pluses and minuses of each situation, but we need to look at the full story before making any decisions.
Agreed. And actually, we have research here at TPVF showing that the claim that the air was cleaner during COVID is actually not necessarily true universally. My colleague here, Dr. Brent Bennett, did a research paper and found that in some US cities, the air quality improved by a very, very small amount. And in some cities, it actually got worse. And the reason for that is this success that America's had in environmental protection. Our air is now so clean that it's almost indistinguishable from natural background pollution levels, basically. Pollen, dust, ash from fires, things like that have a much bigger impact than human activity, even during the COVID shutdown when 40% of vehicle traffic was on the road and industrial production slowed down significantly. Now in other countries, like you mentioned, the ones that don't share our environmental commitment or technology, they definitely did see cleaner air during the COVID shutdown. So that's just another way you can see how what we're doing here is working, and we should share that technology and that commitment with our trading partners overseas. But our next question I need to get to is President Biden and AOC keep talking about going 100% renewable, but we get so much of our energy from fossil fuels that doesn't seem realistic. Has any country ever actually gone 100% renewable? Audrey, I think you mentioned Germany a little bit before. Do you want to
yeah,
on how
that's I'll take that. Germany. So in order to go 100% renewable, you also, again, looking at the big picture, you also have to have some sort of backup system. So if you are on solar and wind, we don't have battery technology in order to solely be on that because the sun's not shining half the day and the wind's not always blowing. So Germany, I think, is the best example on the trying to go towards that 100% renewable, not even close. And in doing so has really caused low-income people some serious stress, increasing their energy prices, and has not made any meaningful changes to greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to that as well. In those instances where countries like Germany, for example, have been extremely reliant, what they end up doing is importing energy from surrounding countries to help them meet the demands that they ultimately have. So maybe internally they have a mostly renewable system. The truth of the matter is that is, as Audrey put it, it's totally backed up. And sometimes it's backed up in instances where they're having to buy energy from the countries around them. And that comes typically with a very high cost. Something I do want to say though, I don't want to totally rail on renewables. Like there is a role for renewables in our energy system. The problem with what AOC is pushing and the Biden administration to shift everything towards those two particular sources is they're just not in a position to take over the baseload capacity that the fossil industry now provides, which is so important for maintaining the reliability of the grid. And, when we want the lights to turn on, the lights turning on and everything that evolves from that.
So this next question is a big one. Y'all ready? How do we defeat the mainstream media's constant propaganda campaign regarding global warming?
I'll start out just going back to what Vanessa said. We just need to have conversations, meaningful conversations, human to human. I think the biggest thing that COVID has taught me is that everyone's human. We all have different problems that we're currently dealing with. So sitting down and talking to your neighbors are going to help push that the positive narrative and not the dominating media narrative. But conversations are going to be key in this push towards. But I'm sure Vanessa has some better insight on that.
Well, no, I mean, I agree for sure. Like I said, the conversations are really important. I also think there's a little bit of overplaying the hand going on here too, because we've had decades now of these warnings about what would happen to the planet. And Americans are watching what's happening. And while maybe the specifics of the information are not as easy to get your hands on as we'd like, and we're all working on that, but there is an extent where people are starting to say, well, you know, most of my lifetime we've been talking about how bad this is, and I'm seeing a little bit of progress, at least, if not a lot, and I'm not seeing the consequences that I was told that I was going to see. So I think the result of that is that there's an opening here. But the opening we have to handle very, very carefully, because we don't want everyone to go the other direction and think that we have no issues when it comes to the environment. We have to be thinking about the environment and all the choices that we make. So I think in terms of the mainstream media, they've just been singing the same tune for a very long time. I think that there's a little sort of organic movement within the American people, and understanding that those concerns start to feel a little overblown. And now it's all of our jobs to put the accurate research-based information into the American bloodstream. And little by little, we'll be able to gain market share and move people's hearts and minds. And so it's a lot of work and we have to do it, but I think we have an opportunity now.
I agree 100%. And I would just say that for folks who focus on the facts and who have a specific understanding or specific experience that is completely relevant to an environmental conversation, be willing to weigh in. I think it's really important for, even though you may walk into a situation where you are the unpopular view in the room, and I've been that person in many instances. I used to be the sole Republican that had to go to the UN climate conferences and represent a very unpopular position among that group of folks. But it's important for the one or two people who are there and their mind is still open to something other than what they've been force fed through the mainstream media, to connect with them and for them to hear you out and to maybe cultivate a broader understanding. So be bold, engage, and just continue to push out the facts. And I think Vanessa's right. We'll continue to gain back the narrative market share that we have lost through years of not engaging.
And one more thing I just want to add in from Vanessa's point that I think that this train is kind of like maybe taking a little bit of a veering. There's two books out that are written. Well, one's about to come out and one is out. So Michael Schellenberger's book is phenomenal. And he typically held a very opposite position. And as he's looking at complete data sets, I mean, this data is in the IPCC climate change report. But instead of like taking like little slivers of it, looking at the complete data sets, he's completely changed his mind. And he has a different audience than someone like me working in oil and gas might have. Another book to look out for that's coming out next month is Steve Koonen's book. And another, like looking at data, and he actually worked on Obama's administration, and I'm really excited about his book. And this book is, again, similar to the Schellenberger book, has open eyes, and is someone that's actually looking at the data, and the data says a different story than what media is saying.
Yeah, agreed. We love Michael Schellenberger's book. It's called Apocalypse Never, by the way, for the audience. Highly recommend. It's a great read. And we're looking forward to Kuna's as well. I'm getting the signal that we have time for one last question. The question is, besides the climate change activist movement, what other threats to American energy independence exist? Which, for those who don't know, we just became energy independent, I believe, in 2019. The technical term is a net energy exporter, which means we export more energy than we import, which is the wonky term for energy independent. I have a thought for this, but what do y'all think on the panel?
I'll just add in one thing about energy export, import, and going back to the Keystone Pipeline. So we have the ability to be completely energy, like not import any energy, but because we don't have proper infrastructure, we can't do that. But I think the biggest threat is none of us expected something like COVID. That was like an unforeseen huge threat. But I definitely think policy and regulations are a huge threat to the success of our industry within the U.S. borders. And then as the United States grows from production, the external global threats are become less, unless you get a situation like COVID, which, I mean, no one expected something like this to happen.
Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, Katie. Keep doing
Sorry,
that.
I'll chime in real quick and then I'll
Yeah.
turn it back over to you.
Yeah.
Another thing that a lot of people are not aware of is there's this movement in the investing world called environmental, social, and governance investing. Essentially what it is energy discrimination. We have these big Wall Street banks and investment firms colluding to deny financing to the energy industry, basically trying to force divestment from fossil fuels and basically bully them out of existence. It's a huge problem not a lot of people are aware of, but we've talked to a lot of energy producers, especially the small independent companies who just can't get the financing that they need to run their business, which means they can't run their business and, employ all the people who work for them to provide for their families and provide the energy that we use every single day. There are some bills in the Texas legislature right now and several other state legislatures around the country to try and push back against this. The one that we're following specifically is SB 13 here in Texas, would basically prohibit companies that boycott fossil fuels from doing business with the state of Texas. So basically saying, if you're going to boycott our energy industry, we are not going to give you any of our tax dollars with state contracts or investments, which I think is an awesome step. It won't stop the energy discrimination campaign, but it'll send a really strong message that we're not going to stand for it here in Texas. So that's kind of what I've been seeing as a threat to our energy independence that a lot of people don't know about. Mandy, what were you going to say?
So I was going to add, and you're exactly right. Y'all been doing some really great work shining a light on that and exposing the real consequences of what's at stake. I was going to add that, look, I think, the filibuster, the efforts to undercut the filibuster, which is a really important tool in the Senate, and a lot of the Democrat push to set aside institutional protections that have been designed to ensure not only balance in policy, but balance in the executive branch and the legislative branch from protecting American interests. I think one of the biggest threats is if these institutional changes that some of the Democrats are out there talking about, getting rid of the filibuster and using the reconciliation process, which the effect of that is it only takes 50+1 Democrats to pass otherwise unpopular policies. I think that's a huge threat because they are going to be able to push unpopular policies that have significant consequences, and they aren't going to be reflective of bipartisanship that's necessary when you're talking about something as complex, diverse, and far-reaching as the energy story. And you're going to have one-sided initiatives actually get through, actually become law, and they're going to be driven more by perpetuating political outcomes instead of doing what is best to set this country and its citizens up for success.
And that's going to be an issue in a lot of other policy areas too, not just energy. So thank you so much to our panel today, Mandy, Audrey, Vanessa. I can't thank you enough for your time and your expertise and just sharing this great news that we have to celebrate Earth Day. And thank you so much to everyone watching for sending in your questions. You can learn more about Life Powered at lifepowered.org and TPPF at texaspolicy.com. And we'll look forward to seeing you on our next live stream.